We are taught the Second World War through dates, victories, and names. Battles are reduced to arrows on a map. Soldiers are reduced to numbers. But war is not clean. It is not logical. And it is rarely heroic in the way textbooks describe it. Behind every advance were men who were terrified. Behind every victory were decisions made under exhaustion, fear, and confusion. Today, we're not talking about what's easy to teach. We're talking about what's usually left out. These are 5 facts about World War II that are rarely mentioned in school. And the first one challenges one of the most common assumptions about war itself. Fact number 1. Most soldiers did not shoot to kill. We often imagine soldiers as willing participants in violence, trained, conditioned, ready to kill on command. The reality was far more uncomfortable. During World War II, a significant number of infantry soldiers did not fire their weapons directly at the enemy. Some fired into the air, some aimed above heads, some never pulled the trigger at all. This wasn't cowardice, it was human instinct. Studies conducted after the war revealed something military planners had underestimated. Most people are psychologically resistant to killing another human being face to face, even under extreme danger, even under orders, even when their own lives were at risk. Soldiers described feeling frozen, or disconnected, or physically unable to pull the trigger. Many had no problem firing artillery or dropping bombs because distance creates abstraction. But at close range, when you can see a face, hear a voice, recognize fear, the act becomes personal, and that changes everything. This reality forced militaries to confront an uncomfortable truth, that war depends on people doing something that goes against deep human wiring. After World War II, militaries quietly changed how soldiers were trained. Targets became human-shaped instead of circular. Conditioning replaced assumption, not because soldiers were weak, but because they were human. This fact is rarely emphasized in schools because it contradicts the idea that war is simply a matter of courage and obedience. It reveals something far more disturbing, that modern warfare often requires breaking a natural resistance inside the mind. And this was only the beginning. Fact number 2. Many victories were not planned, they were improvised. In school, war is presented as a sequence of plans, strategies drawn on maps, orders given, orders followed, victory achieved. This version of war is comforting and deeply misleading. The reality of World War II was chaos. Communication lines broke, units got lost, orders arrived late or never arrived at all. In many cases, the battlefield looked nothing like the plan drawn hours earlier. Officers on the ground were often forced to make decisions without full information, under artillery fire, with exhausted men, and no clear idea of where the enemy actually was. Some of the most successful advances of the war happened not because the plan worked, but because the plan failed and someone adapted faster than everyone else. Junior officers ignored orders that no longer made sense. Units advanced when they were told to hold. Others retreated when retreat was forbidden. These decisions were not heroic in the cinematic sense. They were desperate, and many of them worked. This creates an uncomfortable contradiction. We like to believe victory comes from perfect planning, but war often rewards those who are willing to abandon the plan when reality proves it wrong. Military reports written after battles tend to smooth this chaos into clean narratives. Confusion becomes deliberate maneuver. Panic becomes tactical withdrawal. Not always out of dishonesty, but because institutions prefer order in hindsight. In classrooms, war is taught as if control was constant. In reality, control was fragile, temporary, sometimes imaginary. Many soldiers later admitted they had no idea how close certain operations were to total collapse. A wrong turn, a delayed message, a single decision made by someone's name never entered a textbook. This fact is rarely emphasized in schools because it undermines a powerful myth that wars are won primarily by brilliance at the top. World War II was often decided at the bottom, by exhausted men making imperfect choices in impossible conditions. And those choices came with consequences that history doesn't always record. Fact number 3.
Psychological trauma was widespread and largely ignored. When World War II ended, the guns fell silent. But for millions of soldiers, the war did not stop. It followed them home. Today, we use the term post-traumatic stress disorder. During World War II, that language barely existed. Soldiers who couldn't sleep, who shook uncontrollably, who reacted violently to sudden sounds, were not described as traumatized. They were described as weak, or unstable, or simply not fit. Many men returned home unable to explain what was happening inside their minds. They felt constant tension, sudden fear without danger, emotional numbness. But there was no framework to understand it, and often no sympathy. Armies had terms like combat fatigue or battle exhaustion, but these were seen as temporary failures, not long-term injuries. The expectation was simple: rest briefly, recover quickly, and return to duty, or return to civilian life and remain silent. Silence became the rule. Many veterans never spoke about what they saw, not to their families, not to their friends, sometimes not even to themselves. They learned to function, but not to heal. Nightmares were common. Sudden anger was common. Emotional distance was common. Yet these symptoms were rarely connected back to the war. Society wanted heroes, not reminders of the psychological cost. In schools, the war is often presented as something that ended in 1945. For countless veterans, it lasted decades longer. This fact is uncomfortable because it challenges a powerful narrative that survival equals victory. Many survived physically, but carried invisible wounds that shaped the rest of their lives. These men were not broken by weakness. They were overwhelmed by experiences the human mind was never designed to absorb continuously. And the world simply wasn't ready to admit that.
Fact number 4. Civilians suffered more than the armies. When we talk about war, we focus on soldiers, front lines, battles, victories, and defeats. But the largest group of victims in World War II were not wearing uniforms. Civilians paid the highest price. Entire cities became targets. Bombings were no longer accidental. They were strategic. Homes, factories, hospitals, and schools were destroyed from the air, often without warning. For millions of civilians, war was not a moment of combat. It was a slow, grinding collapse of everyday life. Food shortages became normal. Clean water disappeared. Disease spread easily. Families were separated overnight. Children grew up surrounded by fear, loss, and uncertainty. Unlike soldiers, civilians had no rotations, no leave, no clear beginning or end. They lived under constant stress, listening for sirens, sleeping in basements, watching familiar streets turn into ruins. Many never saw a battlefield, yet they experienced the war every single day. After the war, these stories were often pushed to the margins. Military victories were easier to commemorate than civilian suffering. Medals can be awarded, maps can be redrawn, but the trauma of losing a home, a family, or an entire city doesn't fit neatly into a textbook. This fact is rarely emphasized in school because it challenges a comforting idea that war happens over there, between armies. World War II proved that modern war erases that boundary. Civilians were no longer collateral. They were part of the battlefield. And for many of them, the war didn't end with surrender or victory. It ended only when there was nothing left to lose. Fact number 5. Many soldiers feared surviving more than dying. We assume the greatest fear in war is death. For many soldiers, it wasn't. What they feared more was survival. Surviving with a shattered body, surviving without limbs, surviving with a mind that would never return to what it was before. Soldiers saw what happened to the wounded who came back from the front, men who could no longer work,
men who could no longer sleep, men who stared into nothing long after the war was over. They understood something early on. Death was final, but survival could mean a lifetime of consequences. Many feared becoming a burden on their families, on society, on themselves. Letters and diaries reveal this quiet terror, not always expressed directly, but hidden between the lines. If I come back, not when I come back. This fear doesn't fit the traditional image of heroism. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's deeply human. Schools rarely talk about this because it complicates the narrative. Courage is easier to teach than ambivalence. Sacrifice is easier to honor than fear. But understanding this fear matters, because it reminds us that soldiers were not chasing glory. They were trapped in a situation where every outcome carried a cost. For many, the question wasn't, "Will I die?" It was, "Who will I be if I live?" And that question haunted them long after the war ended.